This is Aesthetically Trained, the podcast. Pushing you to year-on-year progression. With your host, Ross McKinley.
Yo, Ross McKinley, Aesthetically Trained, the podcast. I'm live from Buenos Aires. I'm in a new place. I'm in a new room this week, and I've got a very special guest, one of my friends all the way over in Newcastle, Matthew Walker, the co-owner, founder of Pioneer Performance. You might have heard of it. Matthew, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me on, Ross.
This is the first podcast I've done here in Argentina, so there's a little bit of a time difference. I was classically late, as I always am, but we're going to have some absolute fire in this conversation. Today, we're going to talk about a bit of Matthew's story, a bit about his personal training journey. He's got a fantastic gym in Newcastle that cranks out transformations, much like myself, loads of transformations. But also, we're going to talk about the science behind training, machines, free weights, strength profiles, strength curves. What the fuck are they? Matthew's going to explain it, not me, don't worry. Should you use bands, chains, how to choose a gym? It's going to be very exciting, very cool. You'll learn a lot. So, Matthew, for those people who don't know you, introduce yourself, bro.
Yeah. So my name's Matthew Walker. Like you said, I'm a personal trainer in Newcastle upon Tyne. I've got a gym called Pioneer Performance, which is just on the quayside. I've been a personal trainer now for 7, maybe going on 8 years. I'm turning 30 next month, which is scary. I've worked in other personal training facilities. I've worked in big box commercial gyms. And essentially my journey is just sort of evolved through all of my experiences and working in those kinds of facilities and bringing myself to a position where, I could cherry pick the best, things that influence people's environments and influence their training. And that's kind of the journey that I'm on right now.
It's class. I mean, certainly I would encourage anyone. I'll put the links to both Matthew's social media and Pioneers in below, but I would encourage you to go check out the results are second to none. They've got a really, really, really good sort of portfolio of transformations. You're like, I would liken you to, and I know that you've actually worked with them, so it's probably a bit of a compliment, but certainly M10 in Nottingham and Mark Cousins' gym, I would say it's a similar sort of vibe to that, and that kind of private PT at a real exclusive elite level. How did you get into it, Matthew? What kind of, the first question I always ask everyone, I guess, is what's your, as cringy as it is, what's your why? Like what made you start and kind of get involved with PT and help people? Was it yourself and wanting to get big, or was it maybe helping others, or what got you started?
Like being totally honest, I came out the back of a sports, a sport and exercise development degree from Sunderland Uni. I knew I wanted to be involved in exercise. I knew I wanted absolutely nothing to do with sport because I don't watch it. I used to enjoy playing rugby, but that was as far as it went for me. So I always knew that I was going to be involved on the exercise side of things. And one of my good mates, Jack, he was a personal trainer. He'd actually left uni midway through, decided that wasn't for him. And he started personal training. It looked like he enjoyed it. It looked like it was a good, laid back, happy, healthy lifestyle. And basically, I spoke to him, asked him a little bit about what he was doing, what his daily life was like, how much money you were able to make, etc. And that sounded like a good start. So from there, at the end of my degree, I signed on to a 6-week personal training course that I'd done over at Northumbria University. Basically, from there, I then decided that I wanted to work in a small studio, and I got the opportunity to do that. And then I realized that was, it's a very lonely place doing that sort of thing. And, many studios back in the day, and even still not to like right now, to be totally honest, are little basement things which are entirely devoid of atmosphere. So I knew, but in my experience, I'd always enjoyed like bodybuilding and being in bodybuilding gyms. So every country I go to, every city I visit, I'll always cherry pick a good old school bodybuilding gym to go and experience and train with various people, etc. Nobody famous, but just being in the same environment as some people who look on the face of things physically like relatively successful. And I knew that I wanted to bring that side of that sweaty gym, hardcore environment, take away the spitting and vomiting in the gym, and take away dirty needles and syringes and stuff. Take all the good bits and marry that with the things that are more appropriate for the general population, and basically take those two things, marry them together, and have an environment where people are able to succeed no matter what background you're from.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It leads us on perfectly to my next question as well in terms of Pioneer. So you touched on it a little bit there, but what do you think makes Pioneer different, or what got you to this? I personally, like you mentioned there, I love the old school. I always describe them as the low ceiling. I personally don't really like big gyms. I prefer the low ceiling where you might not know everyone, but if you're struggling on a set, someone will come and touch your elbows, or they'll help you on the squat, or there's that. I always say there's a difference between working out and exercising or training.
Yeah.
When you go in the gym and you've got a training program, you've got a purpose in training, and actually the rougher gyms, although some people might think not the case, people in there, they love the gym that much. Generally speaking, even the bros will know what they're training on a Monday or a Tuesday or whatever. It's actually the fancier gyms sometimes, the David Lloyds, the Virgin Actives, I don't even think that's fucking alive now. But anyway, those gyms where people go in and they're exercising, or they're just working out, they're going in and they're looking at, the lat pull down's free, I'll do a set on that. Or the chest press free, I'll do a set on that. So how are you marrying the two? How are you convincing the people? Because I think a lot of your clients, I think it's fair to say, are probably more career-focused people, maybe higher earners. How are you convincing them, look, this is maybe the people listening? How can you convince them, like, you should be following the program? You need that gritty grunginess, the good points of the hardcore gyms to get real results. How do you do that at Pioneer?
Yeah. So I think you're very right in saying that a lot of the people that we work with are successful, like in other realms, and they've sacrificed a lot of things to get to where they want to be. And in being honest, those are the people who I enjoy working with the most. Because I know that I'm able to add value to their lives, through resistance training. They're never going to be bodybuilders. Sometimes they might not even be, big transformation-based clients. But being able to generate a bit of gumption, a bit of grit on the gym floor, and being able to, I suppose, handle themselves across a big variety of situations. Me and you both know that resistance training is a catalyst for doing that sort of thing. With Pioneer, I think taking a lot of the actual equipment that you would find in those gyms. So, there's some specific brands, there's some specific machines that you'll find in those kinds of facilities that generally look a bit more intimidating to the general population, and maybe they're dark colors and whatnot. There's implements there that look like they're torture devices, but they're not. They're basically just training tools. And so I made sure that I was able to have a facility that was going to be able to facilitate really intense training, but have a bouquet of lilies that are in the front door that basically allows somebody to be disarmed a little bit when they come in. But that doesn't mean that the training and the divide between that sort of area of the gym and the gym doesn't mean that they crossed over necessarily. But I think we've been able to basically generate a facility which has both of these things, and there's an intense, when you step onto the gym floor, there's more of an intense focus there depending on who you are.
I think what I'd like in that too is, I've said it before, is that the way I like to see what I do is I use training and my programs of 28 days in a circle, 12 weeks, all these things is the vehicle for change in people's lives. And that's what I talk about. So I'm most confident in the training, and it's writing down your workout. It's beating your numbers in the gym. And for the men I work with, 25 to 40, gym bros, if you like, the men I work with, I probably wouldn't necessarily always be, although more and more when they work with us, they wouldn't be the first people to maybe think that they want to work on themselves or their relationships or their career as such. Coming to me initially because they want to get bigger, leaner, have abs, bigger arms. But actually over time, what you realize is that you're actually working on, however you want to put it, all the foundations, the pillars of your life, whatever categories you want to put your life into. I'm doing it through the gym, and it's through the confidence that we get in the gym that it then translates and overflows into other areas. And I think, like what you're saying is, you're using, whether it's the flowers at the door or this high end, almost professional, almost making it like not a career, but a very professional atmosphere so that the people you're training are more comfortable. And then through making them comfortable, you can then really attack and address the other areas like the gym, and then it goes in there. Like, and I think I haven't wrote this down, but I'd love you to talk about it a little bit. How do you see, whether it's financially, energy, health, how does resistance training improve people's lives? Maybe someone that's listening who's more career focused. Could you go over some of the benefits for Matthew?
I think in terms of like, encapsulating it, it really allows somebody to build up a tolerance to other aspects of lives. And I think, you'll see, lots of motivational speakers like talk about this sort of thing. And, getting up and going to the gym at 6 o'clock in the morning. If you go out and do that, if you make your bed in the morning, you've already conquered the hardest thing that you're going to come to within that day. So anything else that you have got to handle afterwards, whether that's a solicitor, whether that's a difficult client, whether that's, struggling financial situation, whether that's firing an employee, etc. Nothing is going to be harder than the thing that you got up and done at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
And not all of my clients train at 6 o'clock in the morning, by the way, because otherwise, I would be knackered. However, I think it's a good way of describing how we can increase somebody's tolerance, for life. And it's not just on a psychological basis, but when people resistance train, when people know what they're physically capable of, like they stand up taller, their head is more upright when they're talking to other people, they're able to convey themselves better. Like the benefits are absolutely endless, regardless of who you are. Like, I'm sure there's some minor exceptions and some nuances in there, but for 99.9% of the population, it's something that we should be engaging with, more or less every single day.
Perfect, mate. The next one, going on to, we're kind of going to get into more of the training questions now, if you like. Now, Matthew, as well as designing, I honestly can't rave about the gym enough. They've got such good kit, and Matthew actually also does some refurbishment of old school gym kit, which I think is mega cool. So you can see that on his Instagram. He loves gym equipment. Like no one else I know, actually. So who better to tell us or to give with the difference between things like free weights, which are what dumbbells in the gym, it's what squats, it's what your classic gym exercise, if you like. Whereas what you have a lot of in your gym, Matthew, and certainly in some of the bigger gyms now, Ultraflex is an example I'm sure people have heard of, JD gyms, we'll have plate-loaded machines, we'll have cable machines. So Matthew, what's the difference initially to get us started in this area between free weights and machines?
Yeah. So a free weight is, something like a plate, I suppose, like a barbell to a certain degree, a kettlebell, dumbbell, etc. And essentially it is just an item that has a certain weight. We typically, people tend to do things like bicep curls, dumbbell bench presses with them. And whenever I look at like pieces of equipment, like free weights versus machines, for example, like there's characteristics that you can create with free weights that you can't create with machines. With a free weight, your opportunity for like a range of motion could be absolutely endless if you wanted it to be. Whereas when you're training with a machine, it tends to have like a fixed path of motion. It's going to go in some direction depending on what kind of machine it is or what its goal of achieving is. There tends to be more support available with things like machines versus like dumbbells and free weights, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't create support with free weights.
Support and stability. So what would be for you, for the people listening, I guess, how would you, and not that one's better than the other, but the things that we're looking for in each other, the reasons that we use them, if you like. What would you say? How are you're writing someone's in the gym, they're thinking of what to do for chest. It's an easy one for us lads. Thinking about what to do for chest. Or for any of the women listening, for legs or whatever, how would you use a combination of both in your workouts? Do you think that one's inherently better than the others? Should beginners focus on free weights? Where do we just some brief overview, if you like?
Yeah. I always struggle with brief overview, so I apologize.
No, you can nerd out. That's what I got you on for. You're the man on this.
So it's always gonna come down to the individual, and I hate saying that, but it's too true not to say it. And being more specific than that, like me and you will both know that sometimes people ride around like a passenger in their own body, and they have no idea in terms of what's going on. So I'm always looking at, who am I talking about, and what's their goal, what sort of range of motion do they have available, and then also what ranges of motion are they able to own, like themselves, like they can take their arm back there, but is their arm flailing around? Do they not really have much control when they're there? And then simultaneously, like, what is that person able to tolerate? So can that person actually like tolerate holding some resistance back here, or do they collapse in a heap whenever we give them something? I suppose if in general, people who are newer to the gym, and let's say people who are relatively on the lower end of the trained spectrum, I always feel like they would benefit from using machines a little bit more, as long as they are decent machines, and that's always going to be challenging for someone to like characterize as a newbie, which I totally appreciate. Yeah. But the good thing with machines is that there's an aspect of safety there. So if they can't move it, it's unlikely that their pec's going to rip off that shoulder, for example. Yeah. Whereas if a newbie was to, me and you probably have seen this a couple of times, if they go up and pick up some dumbbells and they go to do a dumbbell bench press, and then they realize that actually there's no way in hell that they're moving it. There's a lot more of a danger there, essentially. Yeah. So for people who are newer in the gym, I prefer having them use machines.
Yeah. I think a good example for this is like, everyone wants to be able to squat. Everyone should be able to squat down to the floor, ideally, injury permitting, hamstrings to calves, good range of motion, nice posture. You see the images of like a baby squatting when you're a kid, saying everyone should be able to do this and be able to squat nice and low. But in reality, most people can't do that. And the answer to be able to squat better and to be able to squat deeper with better form isn't just to fucking squat until you can do it. Yes, there should be some squats in your program to practice, but with the assistance of machines, with the pendulum squat, the hack squat, the leg press, we can practice getting stronger in certain ranges of motion and improve the strength in our muscle to a point where then our squat will improve because of the training that we've done around it. So I think that's it. And it's the same with bench press as well, or with any other exercises. If someone can't do a press up, you don't necessarily just say, okay, mate, let's just keep doing press ups until you can do them. Or, like you mentioned there, a dumbbell bench press. And we'll see loads and loads of lads over the years either tear their pec or hurt their shoulder or whatever from throwing weights up and through using suboptimal, shortened ranges of motion, whether it's because of that ego or whether it's because they're not trained to a good level. So I think, being considerate of this and kind of making sure that what we're aiming for, we can get good results.
Yeah. And I think this is where, no plugs intended, but having someone who's able to recognize the characteristics that you have is also key, because in reality, we don't really know what's underneath, but we're only ever taking our very best guess when we look at someone and we look at the way that they move. Yeah. Some people who we perceive as not being able to squat into full depth, the socket that their femur goes into might be a totally irregular shape, and that person will never ever know about that until they get to a bottom of the squat. And
or until they have an expert looking at it. And one of the downsides I would say, certainly with what I do, and I'm very open and honest about this, is that with online coaching, you're not in the gym with the person. So I believe there's no positive without negative. The good side of that is I'm fucking world class at writing programs. I put more notes into it. The tempo, the coaching cues, I've been doing it for over 10 years. The information's there. But if you're a complete beginner and you don't understand what a tempo is, you're fucked. So it's like sometimes in the beginning, you either need to be going to a gym like yourself or getting expert advice from an actual personal trainer, although they're not all fucking experts, but starting somewhere. And as well, something that I say a lot, and I think sometimes people think it's like for the gram or for your ego, but actually recording yourself in the gym is really important. And then you can send it to me, or you can send it to Matthew, or better, you're doing a PT session with him or one of the lads in his gym, one of his PTs. But then you can actually get feedback on your movements, because I always say anyone who's ever deadlifted really heavy, it always feels like absolute dog shit. And then you watch the video back and sometimes it's either worse than what you thought or better. And you never know, that's called your proprioception. People might have heard that before. where you think your body is in space or how you're moving isn't always how it is. So recording or getting feedback from someone watching you is massive.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's totally key. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
I think the next bit to kind of go on to, and this is going to get a little bit more complicated, but we've covered free weights. We've talked a little bit about machines there, and all machines, anyone who's ever used, and it's an absolute, well, I'll just say it's a bastard of a machine, but the pendulum squat is a great example of this. We'll talk about, and people might have heard online, people talk about strength curves, resistance profiles. Matthew, I'm sure you're going to have some other words for this as well, but basically the way a machine moves, do you know what? I'm just going to let you go for it. Training science, Matthew, strength curves, resistance profiles, machines. What the fuck am I on about? Go.
Okay. So if we look at a resistance profile is something which is external. So many machines, let's say, for example, let's take a seated row, for example. Like a good seated row might have a resistance profile that goes from heavy to light.
Yeah.
And one of the benefits of a good seated row machine that would do that is that it's going to give you something similar to what your body presents, which leads us on to what a strength curve is. So, like, very broadly speaking, across a movement, as a piece of muscle tissue is in its completely lengthened range, it tends to be weaker. As it gets into a mid-range, it tends to get a bit strong, tends to become into its strongest position. And then as that piece of tissue gets even shorter, it becomes weaker again.
Yeah.
So if you let's take whilst we're on that, let's take a bicep, and I'm not tensing my biceps there, by the way. If you were to jump into a bicep curl machine, if it's heaviest there, absolutely fantastic. But if you bring that machine even further in and it gets even heavier when you become to a weaker position, then that might pose a potential risk of injury, depending on who you are and what you're able to tolerate.
I think so. Like an example of this is for everyone: whenever you use a machine in the gym or certain exercises, there's what you might call like the sticking point, or there's the point when it feels heaviest. And this is kind of what we're talking about here. And some machines naturally inherently they have a curve, if you like, where it's almost heavy in the wrong place, depending on the machine, or sometimes you feel it a lot. And that's why I mentioned earlier the pendulum squat. Anyone who's ever used one of them, and if you haven't, it's a humbling machine. I would encourage you to use it. You seem to, when you're coming out of the hole, so when you're coming out of the bottom on that machine, it is like the heaviest fucking thing in the world. And it's both brilliant and torturous at the same time. But this is what we're talking about, is kind of knowing for a machine based on how the machine moves or where it's heaviest. And you might think, and people might not realize this, oh, well, it's a machine. It weighs the same at the top as it does at the bottom. It doesn't, depend on the way that the machine moves, which is what Matthew's kind of explained there. So and this is probably one of the benefits behind using machines as opposed to free weights, is that they should, and you can correct us if I'm right here, Matthew, I'm using the right terms, they should match the strength curve of the muscle more, should be matched by the machine if it's a good quality machine.
That's it. That's a nice general way of putting it. There's some exceptions in there. Like a resistance profile is only ever one aspect of a machine. Yeah. You should also consider like a machine's path of motion, for example.
Right.
So I suppose if somebody was to jump on a seated row, right, where you grab hold of a lever and the arm comes down to the floor. Yeah. And pull that back. Yeah. Everybody will probably be familiar with a hammer strength one. Yeah. Okay. Where your chest is on the pad. As you draw that back, basically. So the path of motion that machine takes. So if you look at the handle actually would go in that sort of direction.
Those curves. Yeah.
Yeah. Whereas if we look at the position that your body would take, it actually takes a path of motion which is like in the opposite direction. So the path of motion of your arm would be like that.
Goes it's opposite.
Yeah. So there's in terms of like identifying a good machine, there's not just resistance profiles. There's path of motion. There's, whether the machine provides like support, does it give you something to push into, or you continuously having to tense your abs and really hold on to a position to stay in the machine. Yeah. I actually think there's a much simpler way of like do it. There's a much simpler way of identifying this that anybody can really do. And it's something that I'd done like way before anyone had even, I don't even think the term resistance profile was around when I recognized this.
It's fairly new, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. But does that machine feel good?
Yes.
If it feels good, it's probably got some really good characteristics that suit you.
Yeah. I think a good one is
for the general population, that's as far as it needs to go. If something feels like utter shit,
then don't do it.
Stop it.
Yeah, exactly. I think a good one. So I'll give two examples for the people listening and watching. Make sure that you like and subscribe as always. So if you're, for example, a lass or someone that's wanting to grow their glutes, right? Could be a lad. You might want a bigger arse. I don't know. Women are into that kind of thing. You're squatting, right?
Yeah.
Now I can squat all day. I've naturally got a big arse anyway. But when I squat, it hits my quads a lot more. Now that's because of the way that I move. So as an example, I might want to pick a machine if I want to grow my glutes. Squats for me probably aren't naturally the best thing. So I would then pick a machine that feels good for targeting my glutes. Now, for a girl might be the same, so whether it's because of the length of your femur, so the bone in your thigh. It might mean that the way you squat or the way that you move, or a lad as well. When you squat, you might think that an exercise is targeting a certain muscle, but actually you're hitting somewhere else. So you have to look at the results, how it feels, and then you personally. And you could be training with a friend. People could train with me, we could squat all day and they'll be like, oh, I'm going to get quads like Ross. Not if you're fucking 6'4" and you hip hinge when you squat and you use a completely different movement pattern when you do it. So be considerate of how you do it. And another example, before I let you say your bit on it, Matthew, is like lads, I think, who want a bigger chest, I'll bench more. I'm going to bench more. Well, not if you've got massive shoulders and you're very delt dominant, and when you press, you use your shoulders. Bench pressing, guess what it's going to do? It's going to continue to use your delts because that's your strength, and maybe you're pressing with those. So you need to pick machines, strength curves, resistance profiles, things that match your strengths and weaknesses to target the specific muscle you're aiming to hit, as opposed to making it up as you go.
Yeah, I like absolutely. I think potentially one other thing to consider on that, just when you went into bench pressing. Like bench pressing it's a skill. Like there's people who train this thing like every single day, albeit most of them people are training that to for a performance-based goal, which is in an entirely different paradigm in itself.
Yeah.
However, if you don't have the skill to perform an exercise, then your likelihood of being able to grow, feel, and stimulate that tissue is going to be reduced.
Yes. I think that's where things like a plate-loaded chest press come in. I think it's a lot better for chest. Then, like Matthew mentioned before, looking at the muscle in a lengthened range, a mid-range, a fully shortened range, trying to train it across that whole profile, if you like. And then also, like I say, considering maybe your own weaknesses and strengths. The next one, Matthew, that I want to touch on is accommodating resistance.
Yeah.
Again, now I'm just going to let you know it out on it, bro. You can just go for it. So what is accommodating resistance? Why should we use it? And what I want to make clear here is that your gym is working with people who are coming from absolute beginners, also advanced, and you do all of this stuff. So this isn't, even though we're explaining it away, or we're trying to at the end at least is explain it away, people can have some take-home points. But these things are for everyone. I'm not just fucking showing off and saying this is accommodating resistance. This is applicable to everyone's training. So what is accommodating resistance and how can we use it?
Yeah. So I think that if you were to type in accommodating resistance into Google, you'll probably find a lot of powerlifters using chains and using bands across squats and bench pressing and deadlifts and whatnot. And traditionally, that is the way that it is thought of. But when we're looking at machines, most machines will also have accommodating resistance factors, which will be the way that the machine, we was talking about before, a way that a machine might go from heavy to light or light to heavy, etc. They are one and the same thing. But when we're looking at accommodating resistance, basically, if we were to sometimes we might take a movement like a squat, which is heaviest at the bottom, just because of our folding proportion. So as you get down to the bottom, that load, we've created a little bit more torque. I'm getting complicated now. We're creating more torque at joints when you're at the bottom, which essentially means that your body has to work harder at the bottom versus at the top. And to keep this simple, try and sit at the bottom of a squat for 20 minutes. Okay, you won't last very long. Just try and stand up in a squat for 20 minutes. You might actually get there. So that's it. That's in a really oversimplified version on like kind of what's going on when we're training. But if we stick with a squat, as you come down to the bottom, you might actually, so we are making that movement harder, but we could make that movement slightly easier by having some bands that assist you when you get down to the bottom, rather than continuously just making that hardest at the bottom when your muscles are working the hardest.
Yes, perfect. So we can also, so it can go both ways, accommodating resistance. So we can make things a little bit easier. So if you're particularly weak in the bottom of a movement, you could use bands to assist you on the way back up, which means you can maybe get more reps. Your form could be a little bit better. It could be that you break in a particular point of a lift. You might cave in the bottom of a squat. So using bands might mean that, yes, you can hold the weight fine at the top. You can hold it fine halfway down. But I certainly remember when I was younger, my upper back, my back and my upper body was not as strong as my legs. And I used to always cave forward in a squat. Some people might do that. And that could be that maybe with the assistance of some bands, as well as working on the weaknesses in different parts of your workouts, it means that you can then train your legs or train that area to its fullest using accommodating resistance. Equally, you can use it to make things harder. So you could add chains to the lift. People even use bands to pull things down into you. So you've got to fight against the band. So we can use them both ways. And you would use these, Matthew, with all your clients, some of your clients. How often in a workout? What would you say?
Yeah. So like accommodate. So I'll use this in like a multitude of different ways. It's not just necessarily working on, it's not necessarily just bands and stuff like I was saying before. You can just change your body position and have accommodating resistance. If someone, like a good example of this is if you were to take let's say you're doing a cable crossover, right? Most people have done a tricep cable crossover. So you grab hold of the two balls out of the cable, you stood there, you start extending your arm. If you step further away from that machine, it's going to get harder for you. If you step into the machine, it's going to get easier for you. That in itself is accommodating resistance.
Yes.
What you might be accommodating there is fatigue. Yes. So when we're stood further back, you should theoretically be, let's just say, fresher. Say you're just at the start of a set and you're able to tolerate more. Stepping forward as your tolerance reduces down is a way for you to start accommodating that resistance.
Right. So you could also, so it's also classed as, I don't think I've actually really classed it as this before, but this is why I get get you on to learn these things.
I mean,
go on.
Like I said, traditionally speaking, if you type in accommodating resistance, you'll see a lot. Yeah, and you know this is something you'll see a lot of old school bodybuilders, right? And you might have even done this at some point. Why are you banned in a movement? I've never used bands. Like, you didn't see Arnold train with bands, did you? But you did see Arnold and you did see Dorian Yates train on a Nautilus pullover machine.
Yeah.
Right. And if you look at a Nautilus pullover machine, it's got a cam on it. And the Nautilus logo is actually a shell, which is like a clam, like in terms of its shape. Yeah. So for reasons that we won't get into, the shape in the line of force that some of the things within the machine take moving around this particular shape makes it easier at some points and harder at some points. Yeah. It's exactly the same as what a band does. So whenever I see an old school bodybuilder slamming bands, stop reverse band in your shoulder press, who do you think you are? Yeah. But then in the same sentence, like, I'll only ever use a Cybex leg press. I'll only ever use a Nautilus hamstring curl. Yeah. And I'm like, well, you do realize that this is the exact same thing. It's just in a different format. Yes.
Yeah, I think there's something that I used to do when I was younger, and I probably didn't. To give people an example for this, is sometimes like if you're doing maybe like on a bench, and I used to do some stupid sets on dumbbell bench press and all different things. And I'm sure we all did when we were younger. I remember doing a dumbbell press from a really high incline, and I do it to failure. Then I put it down one notch. Then I do it to failure. Then I put it down one notch. And that's like almost like what you call like a mechanical drop set. But that is essentially accommodating resistance, where we're changing the position of the body to get more reps or more sets out. Like you mentioned before, stepping closer to the machine or further away. So as well as the bands and the chains, we can also just adjust our body position. And would you say, Matthew, going a little bit off topic here, but what is the goal of doing these things? Is it to get more out of that set? Is it to train to failure? Is it better form? What's the purpose of accommodating resistance?
So the goal of accommodating resistance can be anything that you want it to be. And this is, some people might look at that and think, oh, you're crossing terms there or you're breaking the rules. But essentially, like, they are one and the same thing in terms of like what's actually happening in that. We're looking to manipulate the resistance in some way for some reason. And that might be to provide like a full range challenge across a set, or across a muscle group.
Yeah.
So that might be making sure that we have a bit that's hard at the bottom, a bit that's hard at the top, etc.
Yes.
And we might change exercises, and we might choose an exercise based upon its characteristics.
Yeah.
We might use accommodating resistance for someone who's got a very low tolerance. Okay, so what somebody is able to tolerate in a Smith machine press back here might be absolutely nil, which is why we might use the band.
The band to help them through that part.
Yeah, and they might be able to tolerate more there. They might be able to tolerate more there. They might be able to tolerate more there, which would be fantastic, because if we banded it from, well, it would kind of work either way. But if we was to look at that banded, the band would generally drop off as you get towards the top.
Yeah, perfect. Would you say, Matthew, just to finish on this point, something that I always encourage, and everyone listening now, if I want you to think of this, the last body part, or when you're in the gym, if you think of your glutes, your hamstrings, your quads, your chest's a really easy one, because we fucking all lads know how to train the chest, and we know a lot of exercises. Do you look at your workouts, Matthew, and would you suggest that people think of working the muscle in a shortened range, a mid-range, in a lengthened range? Do you think of that? Do you encourage your clients to think of that? Is that necessary, would you say? Do you want to touch on that?
Is it necessary? Is it optimal? I work with the general population, so it's definitely not. It's not necessary.
Yeah.
But there's people who won't consider this and still get excellent results.
Yeah.
But when I'm looking at training someone and making sure that they have a good experience, some of that experience that I want them, not some experience that I don't want them to have, is joint discomfort and joint pain and excessive DOMs. And if you were to, generally speaking, again, if you were to continuously only challenge the chest in the lengthened position, you might accumulate a huge amount of fatigue, and you might accumulate a huge amount of joint forces, and their shoulders might be sore when they go to work and start doing whatever they do. And so that's some of my thought process in terms of being able to include these things within somebody's workout. It's not always at the forefront, and I'll often consider things like the path of motion on an exercise before we consider resistance profile, because for whatever we're doing, it might just be the bigger factor for that. If someone's arms are flailing all over the place, the resistance profile might not be the thing to look at. It might be actually can I just have this person working in a fixed position without rocking their torso backwards and forwards. So again, it just depends on who I'm working with.
I think for me with that, you're exactly right, and I think it's the fucking PT's biggest ghetto clause, isn't it? Or whenever anyone asks a question online, is it depends, but it is true. But I think that certainly for myself, to give some examples, I think that with my clients, but more so myself over the years, as I've got more advanced, wouldn't class myself as advanced yet, but intermediate to advanced, if you like, you can almost tolerate, we mentioned that earlier, because of our training level and our training age. What I would say is, if you're someone who's maybe working on a specific body part and you're doing the standard things and you're working through a standard range of motion, if you like, and you constantly, what Matthew referred earlier as the mid-range, and that could be that you're just using the same exercises, maybe you would benefit, or you might see some new growth, some new hypertrophy, if you experimented or you threw in some stuff where you do work, I'm not going to go as far as saying extremes, but some different parts of ranges of motion. So for me, for example, with my shoulders, has always been a weakness. And I noticed the biggest change in my shoulders when I focused more on working them from a lengthened position to start. So doing more lateral raises and more cable or cuff raises, where I was starting in or working to a lengthened position, which is getting a really good stretch across my shoulders and then trying to train them, as opposed to when I was doing them with dumbbells, or the classic old lateral raise, if you like, for shoulders. Dumbbells, for me, I was getting a lot more traps, but also if you think about it, I was never really fully lengthening the muscle as much as I would, or getting as much tension or torque, as Matthew mentioned earlier, as what I would if I was using a cable across my body. And it could be the same with your chest. You could always be pressing. You could be doing an incline press. You could be doing a dumbbell. But maybe if you're doing a single arm cable fly where you really opened your chest up and you focus on that one side and you work from a lengthened position, you might see some more growth in your chest then. But like Matthew said, it's beginners. Go on, mate. Sorry.
Yeah. I think what you just raised there was a really good point, with a cable. One of the nice things about a cable is that actually, if we have the cable coming back and you're creating more of a straight line, like running from your arm back into the machine. That'll actually make it it'll make it easier back there in the lengthened position when your tissue becomes weaker. And then as you bring that in, it will get harder. And then as you bring it in further, the machine, the relationship between the cable and your arm, it'll make the resistance a little bit weaker.
Yeah.
Perfect. So there won't be as much resistance.
Exactly.
And whenever I think about that, I always think about that bodybuilder who was in Dubai and he tore his pec. I can't remember his name. You might know.
It was Larry Wheels, I think I know who you.
No, it wasn't Larry Wheels. He was training with Larry Wheels, wasn't he?
Yes, I seen it on the bench, on the incline bench.
Yeah. I always would, like, whenever I see that video, because it pops up every now and again on Instagram, I look at it and think, right, what did his training program look like right up until that point? And I'm sure, it was something that obviously he'd been able to tolerate right up until that point. Yeah. But imagine if in that instance he decided, you know what it is, I'm going to do a pec cable fly instead of this bench press.
Yeah.
How different would his life be?
Yeah, well, you do exactly. And I think it's really important, like you said there, just to finish off on this, is like for everyone, when you're in the gym or you're with your mates, just be considerate of what you've been doing recently. Is it a good idea, like the first day that you're on a new machine or the first day that you're trying? I mean, I don't actually even fucking bench press. I do incline bench. But for example, if you're just benching and you haven't benched in a while and your ego takes over, or you're squatting and you think, I'm going to put a little bit more weight on, your body hasn't been trained in that range potentially for a long time. And the risk of injury is going to be much, much higher. And the same with your programming. If you're someone who's always done the same exercise, and again, it goes back to the importance of having a training program, having someone look at your physique. But if you can identify, like, actually, I've been doing this program and I'm noticing that even though I'm pressing a lot, I'm doing what I think works for chest. My chest isn't growing. My shoulders are growing at a better rate. Well, at that point, you need to look and go, well, this is why. And it isn't always going into a different area, but it isn't always that it's your chest or your shoulders. Could be that you've got poor scapular retraction. Your upper back doesn't keep you tight enough. You're not able to hold and utilize the load that you're using. So there's always a range of factors. I think hopefully what everyone's got from this is, before we get on to the final point, is that you need to be considerate of the individual and try to be at least thinking about what we're talking about here, and then really train hard and follow a program. Basically, I think is what we're both saying. To finish off, to finish off with the last one, you obviously have an exceptional amount of experience in this area. So I thought, who better? Choosing a gym. So everyone listening probably goes, I like to fucking hope you go to a gym or you train to. Choosing a gym, how do we decide? Do we decide based on the kit, the atmosphere? Go.
Okay. So it depends. Yeah, I'm not going to start with it depends. I'd always look for somewhere that's got really high quality equipment. Okay. So looking at brands like Atlantis, Cybex,
Hammer Strength,
Nautilus, sometimes Hammer Strength, sometimes not Hammer Strength. No, not the more I learn, the less I like Hammer Strength. Some of the machines are good. I like the lat pull down.
This is why I wanted to speak to you. I think it's such a mainstream gym bro thing, like hammer strength, hammer strength. And then when you get into it, you're like, actually, Atlantis feels a bit better, or Cybex, or Prime, or there's loads. So go on, mate. Sorry to interrupt you. Keep going.
Yeah. So just like you just mentioned there, like Prime or its old version, Strive, basically, like high quality pieces of equipment for me are the big ones. Making sure that you're in a facility that will allow you to film. There's so many places now that don't allow you to take videos of yourself while you're training, which is obviously a point that you made at the beginning. There's a couple of bigger brands in the Northeast that supposedly don't allow you to film it like a training set, which is really unfortunate. I would just make sure that it looks like there's a good, as long as you get a good vibe from being in that gym, from the people who run it or own it, to the members that are in there. Like, are you surrounded by some people who, look like they're friendly and look like they would help you if needed? It's always going to come down to what you require from a gym. But key fundamentals: does it feel like a good environment? Is it friendly? Is it welcoming? Two, is it got high, good, great bits of kit, that are going to function really nicely and aren't going to be broken for most of the time, which, is not something that I see in here, obviously, because I'm in a bubble. But I know that it's something that people struggle with when they're in other gyms. And I suppose the last one, so a place that is always being reinvested in, and obviously being reinvested in a high quality way. there's so many places that don't reinvest in their equipment, and then owners are wondering why their membership numbers are dwindling, or why they haven't got as many people on the gym floor as what they had 4 or 5 years ago. So just a place which is continuously like reinvesting.
Brilliant. I think a good one is just a rule of thumb, a little question everyone can ask themselves is, if you are doing a top set, heaviest set, or your main focus of your workout, is there someone in your gym who would either help you or would push you to get one more rep? If there isn't, change gyms. And I know that might sound a little bit, but if you're in a pure gym and you don't speak to any cunt there, and none of the staff are helping you, and you don't, then what's the point in being there? Like, because you're not going to get the growth that you want, both physically and mentally, training in a gym where you're complacent or where you don't feel like you can ask for help. The whole point of training is that it's this controlled adversity where there's a possibility that we're going to fail. If we can't fail, what's the fucking point? So we need to be somewhere where we're comfortable enough to fail and have people around who will encourage you to do so. I think that in 90%, I always used to make people, this is back when I was a PT, I used to ask people all the time, have you failed a bench? Or have you failed, I wouldn't encourage people to fail a bench, but to fail a squat. Like in a squat rack, have you failed a squat before? And the most people go, no, and I go, right, guess what we're doing today? I'm going to make you fail a squat. You need to learn to fail safely or be in an environment where you can, because that's a big part of training. It is literally a part of our life where we can have controlled failure, which gives us the strength to improve in other areas. If you can't even fail in a gym and there's no one to support you to do so, get out of there and change gyms. So everyone, really, I encourage you to, and I know it's all right for us because we'll love it, but for us to say, like, don't train at I'm not saying don't train at a pure gym, but I am saying probably don't train at a pure gym. Like, if if you're thinking like, yeah, my gym's okay, but you're not going in, you're not excited for the session, you don't see other people train at you. If you're the odd one out in your gym, you're following a program, you're training hard, just leave and go somewhere else. And honestly, it might be more money, but it'll pay you back.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That's a good point. Yeah.
Good. Right. Last part, mate, the legendary quickfire round. Nothing too pressure, don't worry. So, 8 questions. First 4 are easy. Last 4 are a little bit more difficult. Ready?
Right, let's go.
Cool. Football or rugby?
Rugby.
Yeah, boy.
Always thought you were a little bit posher than me. Old school gym kit or the new? I don't really know how to define this. Just what I thought would be interesting to ask you. So, old school or new school when it comes to equipment?
Old school.
Old school kit, like it. This is interesting. PT or online?
PT.
Yeah, I knew you were going to say that. Cardio or weights?
Weights.
Yeah. Cardio. There's only 2 forms of cardio I do. So, worst place. This is where it gets a bit harder.
Okay.
Worst place you have ever visited?
Worst place I've ever visited.
Don't hold back. Just name them. Just be like, I went to fucking Anik and it was terrible.
Worst place? Sunderland.
Yes. Get in. Best place you've ever been?
New York.
Yeah, I love New York. Sick.
Yeah.
Right. Last 2. What is the worst piece of advice you have ever been given?
Worst piece of advice I've ever been given. Well, nothing stuck with it, so I obviously haven't listened to anything that I have been told. Let's have a think. Worst piece of advice I've ever been given.
Or it could be what I said.
You always have to, you always have to, you have to squat to grow legs.
Yes, that's a good one. I like that. I've done a lot of videos on that in the past. So good. I'm glad that we agree. And then what is the best piece? So the other side of that is, what is the best piece of advice in life, in the gym, whatever, the best piece of advice that's stuck with you that you've ever been given? This is why I like to ask people like on the spot, because if I give you too much prep time for these, you sometimes people never really. I think it's good to go with what comes into your head.
Yeah. What is for you won't go by you.
That's a good. Someone said that to me recently. Actually, that's a good one. Awesome.
Yeah.
Right, Matthew, that was fantastic. Thank you very much. I hope everyone got a lot from it. Those of you that's watching and listening, whether it's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, make sure that you like, subscribe, and comment below. Let me know what you think. Also, any questions that you have, feel free to ask them below. Matthew, can you let everyone know about your own social media handles and also, of course, Pioneer?
Yeah. So my own social media handle is Matthew Walker Pioneer.
Yep.
The James one is just at Pioneer Performance.
Brilliant. Awesome. Thank you very much, mate. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely, mate. Cheers.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Aesthetically Trained, the podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and spread the word.